We are just starting a series on the Bible, and the plan is to begin with some foundational basics and then explore why Christians trust this book and even choose to shape their entire lives around it. So, to do that, throughout the series, I'm going to be talking about the biblical manuscripts a lot. And these manuscripts are the very first written copies of the Bible. So, since ancient writing differs from modern writing, I think it's helpful to spend a minute understanding some of these key differences so you can have a better idea of what the manuscripts are and how they were recorded. So, when you think of writing today, you probably are familiar with paper or digital copies of text. For something casual and quick, you might take notes with the pen and paper. But for something more serious or something that you're going to need multiple copies of, you're probably going to use a computer and make a copy of your digital text either by printing several copies from the one file or sharing that one digital file, like a PDF of the original. But in either case, the copies would be identical because they're based on the same digital file. But in the ancient world, digital files didn't exist. So the process of copying text involved different materials, and it was more expensive and labor intensive. So let's talk about the materials, and then we're going to get into the process. So in Bible times, people wrote using a plant or mineral-based ink, and then often papyrus or parchment for these manuscripts. Papyrus was made from a reed from the Nile Valley, and people made it by slicing the stems of the parchment plant into thin strips and then forming the strips into a mat by laying them in overlapping layers, both horizontally and vertically. And then they would press the layers together, soak them in water so that they would bond, and then they would lay them out in the sun to dry. So the result was a smooth, flexible surface that you could write on. Or there was parchment, which people made from animal skins, and this was typically, sheep or goats, but sometimes calves. And people would remove the hair and flesh from the skin, and then soak it, stretch it, scrape it, and dry the skin in the sun to create a smooth, durable writing surface. So, as you can imagine, this was very labor intensive in either case, and the result was that parchment and papyrus were limited and then expensive, particular to the average person. Especially parchment was really expensive. So people overall wrote a lot less and tended to save writing for important documents. Instead, they relied a lot more on oral communication or potentially maybe more affordable or available materials like clay. But education was also limited, so fewer people had the skills to write, and so they reserved writing for the educated elite or people with specialized roles. Which brings us to the process of how the manuscripts were copied. So the biblical manuscripts were handwritten copies made by professional scribes, and that could also include priests who were trained to be scribes. So this was a job that required training, expertise, attention to detail. To start, scribes would only copy from recognized and verified text to ensure that what they were copying was accurate, authentic, consistent. You could kind of liken it today to how serious researchers rely on primary sources like original documents or artifacts. So the process of copying a manuscript was often a team effort where one person would read the original text aloud while other scribes sat around them and transcribed it, and then still others would check it for precision to ensure that there were no errors. To make sure the manuscript copy was accurate, these scribes would count every letter, every word, and every verse, and comparing it to the counts they'd done of the original copy. And the reason was so that they could make sure they hadn't missed or added any content. No letters, no words, no verses. So if a manuscript copy was damaged or had errors, they didn't even just throw it out where it could potentially be discovered. Instead, they archived it or buried it to prevent it from circulating. And I mentioned that scribes were often priests who had been trained as scribes. And I think this is an important detail because the motivation of the scribes matters. So even with all the measures they took for the writing to be precise, This just generally wasn't just a job for the people doing it, right? They believed that they were copying the words of God, not just some book. And so they were motivated to carefully preserve them for the future, for future generations. So, not to mention the very words that they copied included verses like Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2, which says, "Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you." Or there's Revelation chapter 22, verses 18 and 19, which says, "I warn everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this scroll. If anyone adds anything to them, God will add to that person the plagues described in this scroll. And if anyone takes words away from the scroll of prophecy, God will take away from that person any share in the tree of life and in the holy city, which are described in this scroll." So, believing this, the scribes were very motivated to get it right. Wrapping up, I hope you can see that the Bible manuscripts they're nothing like that childhood game of telephone where the message gets passed along and then changes with each iteration, right? Instead, this was painstaking attention to detail, only copying trusted sources, making sure that every manuscript and every word was thoroughly checked and verified to keep the text accurate and true to the original. But of course, knowing that people copy text with great precision doesn't automatically make that text true, and it doesn't automatically make that text divine. And so that's what we're going to spend the rest of the series, the next few weeks, covering. And so if you have any questions about the Bible or any questions related to Christianity or worldviews at all, go ahead and put them in the comments and I'll try to respond there or in a future video. And if you want to follow along in the series or see any other content like this, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.